Welcome to the France 24 debate. The U.S. Secretary of State says he's put France on notice in an interview with CNN. John Kerry warning against any Iran sanctions violations. This after a 100-strong delegation of French business leaders visited Tehran at the start of the week. For some, Kerry's remarks are little more than posturing, aimed solely at hawkish lawmakers in Washington. After all, U.S. oil executives held their own get-acquainted sessions with Iran's new president long before sanctions were partially eased in November. But a final deal on Iran's nuclear program is still very much up in the air, and a June deadline for signing looms large. It's not just U.S. public opinion that needs reassuring. The White House on Monday announcing that a Saudi Arabia leg would be tacked on to Barack Obama's trip to Europe next month. The Saudis openly distressed over the West's warming of ties with Tehran. Too quick a pivot towards Shiite Iran that could accelerate tension throughout the Middle East? Or do talks with Iran amount to a very narrow window of opportunity that's not to be missed? Today, in the France 24 debate, how to deal with Iran. And with us to talk about it, former French Ambassador François PICARD. Welcome back to the show.
Yes, good evening.
Welcome back as well to attorney and analyst Ardavan Amir Aslani. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And from Abu Dhabi, Faisal Al-Yafai, chief columnist at The National. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And from Washington, James Kirchick of the Foreign Policy Initiatives. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. Our hashtag F24debate. Well, the French can brag about it. They were first in this week. More than 100 business leaders touching down in Tehran. A delegation that's reportedly to be followed by businessmen from other parts, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany.
Hungrily eyeing Iran with renewed interest. The oil-rich country with its population of 76 million is a potential goldmine. And companies around the world are hoping the thawing of Western sanctions will reopen the treasure trove. Iran's car market used to be dominated by French giants like Peugeot and Renault, until international sanctions threw a spanner in the works. The number of cars produced in Iran more than halved between 2011 and 2013, from 1.7 million to just 500,000. But in November, Tehran accepted to curb nuclear activity in return for an easing of sanctions. Now production lines are slowly juddering back to life.
Investing here is a really good opportunity for foreign manufacturers. We have a large production capacity. It's a win-win situation for both sides.
Here in Tehran's suburbs, Renault operates in this factory. Others are following. A delegation of 140 French businessmen set out for the capital to sniff out prospects. Finance Minister Pierre Moscovici said the underlying message should be read as an encouragement to the Iranians to keep their word. Despite saying Tehran couldn't be expected to drop its nuclear program entirely, Iran's foreign minister was keen to reassure the world of the country's commitments.
I believe we are at that historical crossroad, that we can establish the type of relations between Iran and this international community that can in and of itself be the best guarantee that it would be foolish for either side to break away from.
Here on the slopes above Tehran, Iranians celebrated the easing.
It's had a really big effect on public morale. And we've already seen a slight improvement in the economy.
Hardliners, on the other hand, believe the deal compromises the country's interests. But for most Iranians, change is urgent. For some, the embargo even hangs lives in the balance.
There's a lack of medication. Recently, I treated a patient who had a heart attack. I couldn't save him. Later, I saw he'd been taking bad quality medication.
Investors remain wary of the Iranian markets. The recent deal is only an interim accord, with a shelf life of 6 months. So investing here ensures one thing, if nothing else, taking risks.
Again, it's not just hardliners that are wary of the deal. That French business delegation raising eyebrows in Washington. Wednesday on CNN, the U.S. Secretary of State saying France had officially been put on notice. While the French may send some business people over there, they're not able to contravene the sanctions, he said. François PICARD, he says even the sanction, they will be sanctioned if they do, and they know it.
No, that goes without saying. I mean, it's true that there was an important French delegation, I mean, led by the MEDEF, which is the French Confederation of Business and Industry Employers. I mean, these people, they know their job. I mean, they're not morons, you know. They're able to read the text. They know that some things which are allowed, clearly, especially after the agreement on nuclear affairs on the 24th of November, and other things which are not allowed. What is allowed immediately, in fact, is business on a few fields in which sanctions have been suspended. This is true for automotive goods, I mean, parts. It is true for aircraft parts, and it is true more generally, and this is even before the recent agreement, it is true for all humanitarian business, and this covers agriculture, I mean, food industry, it covers medication, pharmaceuticals, I mean, services in the medical field. This allows to make business immediately, in fact.
And when will that bear fruits for the French? Do you think that there'll be deals signed immediately on those areas where these sanctions have been eased?
It is possible, and it is allowed in these fields.
What's your prediction?
Automotive industry, aircraft spare parts, and humanitarian goods. I ideally hope that, for instance, in the automotive industry, Peugeot and Renault, which played an important role in Iran, as we have just seen, will be able to come back. This is perfectly legitimate, and nothing can attack, I mean, this kind of decision and this kind of agreement.
All right, we have a comment on Twitter. Kerry lecturing the France over the MEDEF, like you say, that's that business leaders group visiting Iran. But what about the 10,000 American companies that deal with Iran? I'm not sure. I don't know if there are 10,000 who deal with Iran. But let me get your reaction straight away, James Kirchhoff, to Ambassador Nicolo, hoping that companies like Renault and Peugeot can quickly sign deals.
I don't think that's what we need right now. I think if the goal is to stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon, we've seen that the sanctions that have been placed for years were very effective in getting the Iranians to come to the table in the first place. So if we want to really bring them to their knees and get them to stop this, and there's no indication from the deal that was tentatively agreed to is going to stop their nuclear program, I think what is necessary is the adoption of the Kirk-Menendez sanctions bill currently in the Senate, which would strengthen sanctions in a year if this deal does not work out, if the Iranians do not uphold their end of the bargain. So it's disappointing to see these French businessmen going over. I don't really blame them because the messages from Washington have been so muffled, and it's been unclear what Washington wants. I mean, we've seen John Kerry making these statements, but at the same time, we have Wendy Sherman, who's the lead negotiator, saying that it's actually a good sign to have European businessmen going to Iran because it sends the message that this is going to this will convince them to hold up their end of the bargain. So it's a very mixed message coming from Washington.
Ardavan Amir-Aslani?
I don't think the message that comes out of Washington is mixed up. As a matter of fact, I think it's perfectly clear. As Ambassador Nicolo pointed out, the French delegation went to Iran on a perfectly legitimate basis to conduct discussions with the Iranian counterparts within the framework of international law. Number one. Number two, as far as the position of the United States is concerned, it's very clear. There is an interim deal. Iranians have got 6 months to reach a final agreement with the group of 5+1, Security Council permanent members plus Germany. And by that date, if a deal occurs, sanctions may be gradually lifted. But that being said, the message coming out of America is the exact contrary of what I heard. Of course, there's been some talk from the Senator Menendez about putting up additional sanctions upon Iran. Not today. Sanctions that are proposed are to take effect after 6 months if a substantive deal doesn't come out. But furthermore, what we're getting from the U.S. is a different message also. The head of the Senate Arms Committee, Mr. Levin, wrote an open letter within the New York Times asking for senators to postpone any sanctions bill that is supposed to be advanced. Hillary Clinton came out herself, and she's a rather hardline on the Iranian nuclear issue, and she also suggested that sanctions should not be implemented against Iran at this stage, and we should give diplomacy a chance. President Obama himself threatened to veto any new sanctions measures. And by the way, this story is not about humiliating anyone. We don't want Iran to go on its knees. We want peace and prosperity to come back to the region, and this can come only through dialogue and diplomacy. And that's what people are doing. And the French, from a legitimate point of view, they have embarked upon legal contacts with their counterparts, and nothing could be said against this initiative. And if Kerry said that this is a wrong step, I think he's wrong. Because what has occurred, anyhow, is a psychological shift in relation to Iran. Sanctions are still implemented, it's true, but the people are looking differently at Iran. Look at Austrian Airlines. They have embarked themselves on renewing their flights to Tehran. Even hotel companies from the UAE are signing hotel agreements with Iran. So we should not look to humiliating anyone and be only constructive through diplomacy and dialogue.
Your reaction then to one comment we've gotten from one of the viewers. They're referring to Tehran, attempting through deception and maneuvers to pursue the nuclear weapons project while diminishing the international sanctions.
You know, the big thing that people don't seem to understand, at least the person who tweeted this comment, is that it's not about trusting Iran. It's not about, closing your eyes and trusting Iran that Iran would comply with the signature. In this specific matter, you have an international organization with the means to verify what Iran has undertook to abide by. It is the International Atomic Energy Agency. And they have sent people over there who, in the instance of Natanz and Fordow centrifuge facilities, they're going in every day to check out whether Iran is complying with this undertakings. There are cameras filming the facility 24 hours. It's not about trusting anyone. It's about ensuring that Iran complies by its signature.
James Kirchhoff?
Yeah, the people at the IAEA would really beg to differ with the last commentator's description of the access that they've had to the nuclear facilities. I mean, for the past 10 years, the Iranians have been deceiving the world repeatedly. I mean, building facilities in the sides of mountains, miles underground does not really instill confidence that this is a civilian nuclear program. The fact is that Iran does not need a civilian nuclear program. They have the second highest gas reserves in the world. There's lots of potential for renewable energy. They have a huge oil stockpile. They're, devoting billions and billions of dollars and to be going through all these problems with the international community leads one to the conclusion that the aims of this program are not civilian.
We can always go back to history and look at what people did or did not. Today, it's about Iran being a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, abiding by its signature. The NPT authorizes Iran to have a civilian nuclear program. The NPT authorizes Iran to enrich uranium on its own territory, and that's what the Iranians are trying to do. So you cannot constantly go back to history.
And to the comment that it doesn't need a nuclear program?
And nuclear energy is not only about energy. It's about science. It's about medication. It's about pharmaceutical products. It's about the general technological progress of a country at large. The U.S. is going to become energy independent. Please allow me to say what I have to say, and then you can interrupt later on. The United States is going to become energy independent in 2015. Does that imply that the Americans should shut down their nuclear facilities? Being energy independent from non-nuclear sources should not prevent people from having access to the technology and science that goes with it.
James Kirchhoff?
Again, their economy is suffering. They have vast oil and gas reserves. There's lots of potential in the renewable field. It's very difficult to see why, given all the trouble that they've gone through and the threats of potential military attacks from Israel and the United States and the sanctions and the international isolation that they've been receiving, that they would be going through all of this just for a civilian program. I find that very difficult to believe, and I think most people in the IAEA find it difficult to believe as well.
That's not true.
Let's go to Faisal Al-Yafai. And I got to say, Faisal, you're in a very interesting place because you're where you're sitting in Abu Dhabi. You're between Saudi Arabia, and we know their position. We're going to talk a little bit more about them as well in a moment. And places like Dubai, which stand to make a lot of money out of more trade with Iran. What's the view where you are on this French delegation visiting?
Well, you're certainly right about the position of the UAE and of the Gulf. The Iranians are right across the Persian Gulf, across the Arabian Gulf. So it's a very real issue. I find myself very much in agreement with Erdogan, actually. I think that this is business as usual. This is the carrot and stick approach that they've been talking about. And this is merely the French going to Tehran to show off the carrots that they have on offer. I think that will bring the Iranians are more likely then, once they see what they can get, after the sanctions, they're more likely to adhere to the deal. But I think what John Kerry was doing was sending a signal to those hardline people in Washington, but also to the Gulf, because the Gulf has this question about Iran, about this shotgun marriage between the Iranians and the Americans. And that is that as the traditional allies in this region of the Americans, I think they are concerned that they have been sidelined in this rapid rapprochement with Tehran, and they don't want what they consider their legitimate concerns to be sidelined if Mr. Obama is searching for a legacy in the next 3 years.
François Nicolo, let me ask you about this, because people forget that when they sat down for those nuclear negotiations back in November, it was the French towing the hard line, the ones who said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a good deal, let's go back to the table, and they signed the second time around. And now it seems as though the French are the ones who like to employ more carrot than stick.
Yes, perhaps, but they're not the same French. I mean, on one side, you have the government, which follows a political line, and the other side, you have the business community. And they're making business. We are an open society, people, the French businessmen are not, submitted to the government. And in that case, the government shows a line, that we know, a hard line, that's true. People have said that it is because of the French, submission to Israel or to Saudi Arabia. Things are not that simple. First, one has to remind, that this negotiation between Iran and the 5+1, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, these 6 powers, they don't negotiate for themselves. They negotiate for the international community. The international community includes, in the first line, the neighbors of Iran. So it's not absurd. It's not illegitimate to take into account the worries, right or wrong, the worries of Israel or the worries of Saudi Arabia. So this is for the political line on the French. And on the other side, we have the businessmen. All the companies which had an interest in Iran or had worked with Iran and in which Iran had an interest, it's true, were present in Tehran, but there have been businessmen from other countries before, and there will be after. I've met American businessmen when I was ambassador in Tehran. They spoke to the Iranians saying sanctions forbid to make business, but they don't forbid to talk. They don't forbid to have a dialogue. And these people were preparing for the future, as the French are doing today.
All right, when we come back, we're going to look at how it's all playing over in Tehran. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.